Hey, Dave from Stuff Outdoor Dads Like, coming back to you with another review, this time with the Norco Fluid 20-inch kids bike. Now, when I was looking for a 20-inch kids bike for my son, I had shopped around on Craigslist and pretty minimal products were available. This is around the start of COVID. A friend had recommended a bike that they had gotten, but it was like $1,200 for a new kids bike. Now, having said that, that kids bike is awesome, and I think dealt with a lot of stuff that this bike didn't when it was made. So prior to this bike, we had some kids-specific geometry bikes from different makers like Pello and another one from Provello that they loved and worked well. And I thought, wow, that's great. It's kids-specific architecture, design. But I also thought, this has got to be kind of a load. I mean, these other bike companies have been around a long time. I'm sure they're using kid-specific parts and sizes for their things. And it turns out, at least for this bike, that was not really the case. I also sort of figured the Canadians would be sort of ahead on this because they seem to have such a dominant mountain biking scene, especially on the West Coast in British Columbia, where I think Norco is, at least Rocky Mountains there. But so I'm going to talk about some of this bike's features, and I don't mean to trash Norco, and I bet at this point, because this bike is several years old, I don't know what year it was originally purchased by the first owner. Hopefully they fixed some of this stuff. So again, this review is more to know what to look for, because if you're like me, it's hard to pay full price for something that you know is going to get beaten up, it's going to get put down on the derailleur side, but you want to get your kids into biking and be a part of it. So sort of from back to front, Shimano Altus. I mean, not the best derailleur on the planet by any means. I think the nice thing is this would be easily replaceable with something that's better that might make shifting a little easier. The other thing is the weight of this. I don't know the weight off the top of my head. I haven't put it on a scale or anything, but the thing is still pretty heavy. I think some of the other kids' bikes that we've gotten that are kids-specific are much better about trying to reduce the weight of these bikes to make it easier for kids to pedal and lug around on their own. So I think, again, some of this stuff hopefully has been improved upon by Norco and other sort of traditional bike manufacturers like Specialized, but it's just stuff to watch out for because I thought, oh, these guys would be on top of it, and they really weren't. The next thing is this saddle. Going from my son's current kid's bike, which is a 18-inch, to this bike, this saddle size is huge and doesn't really allow him to stand in front of the top tube, but not on the saddle itself. So one thing that I might do is just pull off the saddle off his current kid's bike and put it on this. But we're going to see in the spring if he really has sort of grown into this or he still needs some of these sort of adjustments to make it better size specific. Decent tires, I think that's fine. I have no sort of specific issues with the tires on this bike. I think they're kind of nice because there's more of a slick. So for kids who are riding more on the road and not all the mountain bike is sort of realm, which I think is probably kind of closer to what we might be, sort of maybe a 50-50 split, or maybe even 75% in the neighborhood, 25% on trails is more realistic. So that's probably a decent tire. It seems pretty fat, so I think that's going to be good in terms of gaining grip and confidence, and you could run them at a lower tire pressure to really allow for good traction. The problems come up here in the handlebars, in the cockpit, and again, this is sort of surprising to me. So one thing, and I think these are aftermarket grips from the previous owner, so that might be the issue, but these actually add bulk here. And when you look at a lot of the kid-specific geometry, one of the things they mention is that the sort of diameter of the bars are slimmer to accommodate smaller hands, and that doesn't seem to be the case here. The other thing is the distance to these levers. Now, I'm a full-grown adult, and these are appropriate lever distance for me. So for my son's shorter fingers, he really has trouble reaching to these bars or the brake levers to brake. So I think one of the things that we're going to do in the spring, again, assuming that there's not a lot of growth between now and then, is replacing these levers with smaller levers that he's more easily able to brake. The brakes are probably the most important thing on the entire bike, and it's great that they're hydraulic disc brakes, but if you can't really reach to get there, that's going to be a problem. The next thing is this shifter. Now, I don't know what kind of shifter this is. It's a Shimano generic shifter, so maybe it's an Altus shifter as well, but the throw for these guys is pretty challenging. It takes a decent amount of force to kind of upshift and downshift, as opposed to some sort of the higher end shifters that I would use on my bike. Now I realize a lot of this stuff is cost cutting for the manufacturer to try to get these bikes in a lower price point. But I think spending another $100 on a bike, and maybe that's a lot, maybe 50 or something like that, especially at their pricing, would really get to a lot better bike. So one of two things is going to happen in the spring. Either my son's going to grow and we're just going to kind of tough it out and see if he's able to brake and he's able to shift, then we're good. Otherwise, I think I'm going to have to start replacing parts like the brake levers, which is going to require a brake bleed, like the shifter, like the grips, and then swapping the saddle. But like the saddle, getting a smaller saddle, that shouldn't cost anything more. So, this bike I think was probably $500 on the used market. Maybe it was $450 in sort of the 2021 kind of COVID time period. So bikes were still hard to come by. So I think it was good. And, but what ended up happening is we got this bike thinking you just hop right into it from a 16-inch, which is maybe just a little bit naive on our part. But some of these nicer bikes, with similar sized kids in his year, they were able to make that jump because the bike was set up better for size-specific geometry. Instead, we sort of went back and bought our friend's old 18-inch bike that they were using. So our 16-inch bike that they were using from a 14 that we had before. So they bought their 16. They went all the way from that 16 to 20 for a similar age size kid, and it worked out fine. But it really meant that this bike that was a relative deal ended up costing $250 more because we needed this sort of middle bike to allow for that transition. And I think that middle bike was good, so I don't really have any regrets there. But this bike has just basically been collecting dust for 2 years because of that limitation. So that's it. Questions, comments, leave them in the comments. Dave from Stuff Outdoor Dads hope you enjoyed the review.